There is a folder buried deep in the National Archives of the United States. It is thin, only a few pages, but what is written inside those pages changed everything we thought we knew about Bruce Lee. Not about his kicks, not about his speed, about why certain powerful people in America were terrified of him. And here's the part that almost nobody knows. That file was sealed while Bruce Lee was still alive. It wasn't opened until after he died. Ask yourself, why would the most powerful intelligence agency in the world keep a secret file on a martial arts actor from Hong Kong? The answer is not what you expect. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why. The man they didn't understand. Let's go back to 1959. A teenage boy steps off a boat in San Francisco with exactly $100 in his pocket. He speaks broken English. He owns almost nothing. He has no connections, no family waiting for him, no plan. But he has something that very few people in the world have ever had. He has a mind that cannot stop moving. Bruce Lee was 18 years old when he arrived in America, and within a few years, he would do something that no Asian man had ever done before in the history of Hollywood. He would refuse to be invisible. But before we get to the CIA, the Cold War, and the thing that certain men in suits did not want the world to see, you need to understand something about Bruce Lee that most people miss. He was not just talented, he was obsessive in a way that bordered on frightening. He kept notebooks, hundreds of pages of handwritten notes on philosophy, physics, the human body. He trained at 4 in the morning. He trained until his hands bled. He trained when he was sick, when everyone told him to stop. One of his students once said that Bruce Lee didn't practice martial arts the way other people practice. He said Bruce practiced the way a drowning man practices breathing, like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Now, at this point in the story, you might be thinking, okay, inspiring story, man overcomes odds, typical stuff. But wait, because this is where it gets strange. Because Bruce Lee wasn't just fighting for a role in a movie. He was fighting something much bigger. Something that the people in power had worked for decades to put in place. And they noticed. The system he broke. Here is something most people don't know about Hollywood in the 1960s. There was an unwritten rule. An Asian man could appear on screen, but only in a very specific way. Quiet, submissive, in the background. Never the hero. Never the one who wins. This wasn't an accident. It was a policy. Unofficial, yes, but real. And Bruce Lee walked straight into the middle of it. When he pitched the concept of what would become the television series Kung Fu, the story goes that executives loved the idea. They were excited. They even told him it would be perfect. Then they gave the lead role to a white actor, David Carradine, a man who had never practiced martial arts a day in his life. Bruce Lee was told, and these are the kinds of things people only say behind closed doors, that America was not ready to watch a Chinese man as the hero of a TV show. Think about that for a moment. A Chinese man, in America, being told he is too Chinese. Now here is what most people do in that situation. They accept it. They compromise. They take the smaller role. They wait. Bruce Lee did none of those things. He looked at Hollywood and he turned his back on it completely. He went to Hong Kong. And what happened next is the reason there is a file with his name on it inside a government building in Washington, D.C. But before we get there is one more thing you need to know about what happened in Hollywood. One moment that most people have never heard about. And it explains everything about the rage that Bruce Lee carried with him for the rest of his life. In 1966, Bruce Lee was cast in The Green Hornet, a television series. He played Kato, the sidekick, the driver, the man who stood 2 steps behind the hero and never took the spotlight. He was brilliant in it, absolutely brilliant. Audiences in Hong Kong loved Kato so much they nicknamed the show The Kato Show. Back in America, they barely remembered his name. But that wasn't the moment I'm talking about. The moment came after the show was canceled. Bruce Lee went back to looking for work. He was more experienced now, more confident. He had proven himself on screen. He went into meeting after meeting, studio after studio, and every time they would look at him, listen to his ideas, seem genuinely interested, and then, very politely, tell him no. One executive told him to his face that American audiences simply could not accept an Asian man as a leading man, that it wasn't personal, that it was just business. Bruce Lee left that meeting, got into his car, and sat there in silence for a long time. Nobody knows exactly what went through his mind in those minutes, but everyone who knew him well says that something changed after that day. Something hardened. He stopped trying to convince Hollywood. He decided to make Hollywood come to him. And that decision, that single pivot, is what started everything that followed. The fire that started in Hong Kong. When Bruce Lee arrived in Hong Kong in 1971, he was not yet a global superstar. He was a frustrated man with a chip on his shoulder and something burning inside him. He made his first film, The Big Boss, in just a few weeks. It shattered every box office record in Hong Kong history. Then came Fist of Fury. Then, The Way of the Dragon. And something happened that nobody in America had anticipated. People everywhere, in Hong Kong, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in South America. People who had never seen themselves as the hero of any story, who had spent their entire lives watching white men save the world on a movie screen. They saw Bruce Lee. And they went absolutely insane. Lines wrapped around city blocks. Theaters showed his films at midnight because they were fully booked during the day. People who didn't even speak Chinese were watching his movies and cheering because they didn't need to understand the words. They understood the feeling. Here was a man from Asia beating every opponent who came at him. Not with tricks, not with weapons, with his body, his mind, his will. And the message, even if nobody said it out loud, was something dangerously simple. We are not less than anyone. Now, you still remember that CIA file, right? If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The file. Here is what we know. During the Cold War, the United States government had a very serious problem. The Soviet Union and China were actively trying to spread their influence across the developing world, Asia, Africa, Latin America. Part of that strategy was cultural. They wanted people in those regions to see America as the oppressor, as the enemy. And America, to be fair, was not always helping itself. The civil rights movement was tearing the country apart. Images of violence against Black Americans were broadcast around the world, and Hollywood, the great machine of American soft power, was still, in 1971, putting Asian actors in the background and white actors in the lead. Intelligence analysts had a term for this: soft power vulnerability. The gap between the story America tells about itself and the reality the rest of the world can plainly see. By 1971, that gap was enormous. Now imagine you are an analyst inside the CIA. You are sitting in Langley, Virginia. It is late. The fluorescent lights are humming. You are reading field reports from Manila, Lagos, Kuala Lumpur. Every single one mentions the same thing: the crowds. Extraordinary, unprecedented crowds forming outside cinemas to watch a single man from Hong Kong. Millions of people across Asia and Africa cheering as he defeats Western opponents on screen. Not for a politician, not for a religious leader, for a movie. You write a report. You note that this man is creating a cultural phenomenon that is difficult to control. You note that his popularity in regions of strategic importance is growing rapidly. You note that his message, even if it is just a movie, carries enormous symbolic power. You put that report in a folder. You mark it with a name, you file it away, and you wait. The deal and the return. By 1972, Hollywood came crawling back to Bruce Lee. Warner Brothers, one of the biggest studios in the world. They offered him Enter the Dragon, a major co-production, real budget, real promotion, a genuine shot at global stardom on Western terms. Bruce Lee accepted. But he did not walk in as a grateful man. He negotiated. He pushed back on the script. He insisted on creative control over how his character was portrayed. He refused to play the submissive, passive Asian that Hollywood had always wanted. People on set remember him as completely magnetic and completely exhausting at the same time. He was everywhere. He knew every camera angle. He challenged every decision that compromised his vision. One crew member said that working with Bruce Lee felt less like making a film and more like watching someone wage a war. And maybe that is exactly what it was. Because Enter the Dragon was not just a movie to Bruce Lee. It was his answer to everyone who had ever told him he was not enough. It was his declaration of something that he had been building since he was 18 years old with $100 in his pocket. Filming finished in late 1972. The movie was scheduled for release in August 1973. Bruce Lee never saw it. The night everything stopped. July 20th, 1973, Hong Kong. Bruce Lee is at the apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei, going over a script for his next film. He complains of a headache. She gives him a common painkiller, Equagesic. He goes to lie down. He never wakes up. He is 32 years old. The official cause of death? Cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. A rare and unexplained reaction to the medication. Now, before we go any further, pause on that for 1 second. This is a man who could perform a 1-inch punch that sent grown men flying. This is a man who could do push-ups on 2 fingers. Body fat under 3%, measured, verified. And we are told this man died from a headache pill. But from the very first day, nothing about this felt simple. The questions started immediately. How does one of the most physically perfect human beings on the planet die from a headache pill? Why did the autopsy reveal trace amounts of cannabis in his system, which some doctors said complicated the reaction? Why were there so many conflicting accounts of where he was and who he was with in the hours before his death? And why, this is the one that nobody could answer, why was a second man, Bruce Lee's production partner Run Run Shaw, so unusually quiet in the days that followed? Some people pointed to the stress. Bruce Lee had been pushing himself to the point of collapse for months. He had already suffered one mysterious episode of brain swelling just 2 months earlier, quietly kept out of the press. His wife Linda later said that in the weeks before his death, Bruce had seemed different, slower, like something inside him was struggling. But Bruce Lee never slowed down voluntarily. People began to whisper. The whispers became theories. The theories became legends. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., that thin folder with Bruce Lee's name on it was quietly closed for good. What the file actually meant. Now here is where I want to slow down. Because this is the part that matters. The CIA file on Bruce Lee. And yes, documents referencing surveillance concerns about foreign cultural figures during this era have been found through Freedom of Information requests. Was not about whether he was a spy. It was not about whether he was a communist. It was not about his personal life. It was about what he represented. Think about the world in 1972. The Cold War is at its peak. Every corner of the planet is a battlefield of ideas. America and the Soviet Union are fighting not just with weapons, but with stories, with images, with symbols. And here comes Bruce Lee, a man who looks like the people that America told for decades do not matter. A man who wins, consistently, powerfully, beautifully. A man whose films are being watched with tears and fists raised in the air in exactly the regions of the world America is desperately trying to win over. He wasn't just an actor. He was a counter-narrative. And the most powerful intelligence agency in the world knew it. Whether they did anything about it, that part of the story remains sealed. Or perhaps it was never written down. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The Moral Blow. Enter the Dragon was released 6 weeks after Bruce Lee's death. It made over $350 million worldwide. It is still considered one of the greatest action films ever made. But here is the detail that hits hardest. On opening night in Los Angeles, the line outside the cinema wrapped around the block and down the street and around the corner again. People had been waiting since early morning. The theater was sold out for every showing that day. Inside the screening room, when the film ended, people did not move. They sat there in the dark, in silence, for almost a full minute. And then they started clapping. Not because the movie had a happy ending, not because the good guy won, but because they had just spent 90 minutes watching a man be completely, unapologetically himself on his own terms. In a world that had tried over and over to make him smaller, Bruce Lee became more famous after his death than he had ever been in his life. His image spread to every continent. His quotes were printed on walls and whispered in gyms. His films were watched by hundreds of millions of people who had never heard of him before. Kids in Brazil, in Nigeria, in the Philippines, in rural China. Kids who had never seen themselves represented as powerful on any screen watched Bruce Lee and felt something shift inside them. He gave them something that no politician, no speech, no policy ever could. He gave them a mirror that showed them strong. The very thing that powerful people had feared, a man from Asia becoming a global symbol of strength, dignity, and defiance, happened anyway. It happened because of what he left behind. Not the movies, not the philosophy, not even the martial art he created. He left behind proof. Proof that the wall they built to keep certain people out of the story was never as strong as they wanted you to believe. He hit it once, and it cracked.